Hello and welcome to another day on Cornwall Pocket Farm, where I try and figure out how to live sustainably on 300 square metres in the city. Today we're going to do something a bit different because it's winter and it's a bit cold and wet outside. I find when I talk to my friends and neighbours that very few people know much about green building or sustainable building. And I used to work in that industry, so I thought it might be useful if I just discussed a little bit about the things that I know on a very basic level, not getting into too much detail or technical stuff, but just to cover some of the basics. So the first thing I want to talk about is the essentials for a warm, comfortable, dry, mould-free home. Somewhere that's really pleasant to live, come back to, somewhere that feels really nice. And also doesn't cost a lot to run. There are three key components to a good house, basically. And those three things are heating, ventilation, and insulation. I think of those really as the trinity of good building, or a comfortable home, if you like. Without those three, all working together, you really can't achieve a really nice, comfortable home. So let me go into a little bit more detail and explain what I mean by each of those. It's a little bit dark today. Well, the sun keeps going in and out, so I hope the lighting will sort of move around a little bit, but I can't really do much about that. I have my one op-shop light that I found, which is doing a sterling job, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see anything, but I still use the natural light from the windows, so you might notice the lighting going light and dark. But anyway, on to the topic at hand. So let's have a little think first off about, well, let's start with insulation. Insulation, essentially what that's doing is it is enabling you to have a different temperature inside your home than outside. People always say to me, oh yeah, but New Zealand's not really that cold, we don't need insulation. And that's missing the point, because it does get hot in New Zealand. It gets colder than you want it to be, and it gets hotter than you want it to be inside your home. So you need that insulation layer so that you can have a different temperature inside than outside. When we did the renovation in our house, we put lots and lots of insulation in. We lowered the ceiling so that we could get more insulation in. We have a flat, it's called a skillion roof. It's basically a flat roof on a slight angle, but there isn't any cavity in the roof space. So when we did the renovation, we dropped the ceiling so that we could put a lot of insulation in that ceiling. Then what we did, of course, was anywhere there was framing and there were cavities in the walls, we filled that with insulation as much as we could, and in some places it was really thick. We also put an insulating layer all the way around the outside of our home. The other important thing we did with the external insulation is that we went down and carried on the insulation past the slab floor. We have a concrete floor, and a lot of heat can be lost on a concrete floor on the edges of that slab. So our external insulation went down and past the slab right to the ground layer. Ground, incidentally, is actually a very good insulator. Double glazing, of course, is a form of insulation. It means that the windows are always windows. You're going to lose heat through windows because it's just glass, basically. But if you can have double glazing or more, in other countries you can get triple glazing and more. If you can have a thicker window like that, you will hold more of the heat. So we have double glazed windows here. That does make a big difference. It's a lot better than that sort of single pane glass that a lot of Kiwi houses and New Zealand houses do have. If you have the opportunity to put in some double glazing, then certainly that's a form of insulation, so definitely go for that as well. And the other thing is that in New Zealand, most windows, certainly in more modern houses, seem to be aluminium, which is quite bizarre because metal is a very good conductor of heat. And what that means is that it transfers heat really easily. So if you've got a metal window frame, you're just losing all this heat through the frames of your windows, as well as losing it through the glass. But having a double glazed aluminium window is completely nonsensical in my book. Anyway, That's another thing, we won't get onto that. But wherever you can get to and wherever you can get insulation, put it in. It really is worth it and it pays off in the long run. Okay, let's talk about ventilation next. So with ventilation, you have good ventilation and you have bad ventilation. Bad ventilation would essentially be drafts, you know, where your doors and windows aren't closing properly or you've got gaps in places. That's uncontrolled ventilation. I always remember somebody saying to me, it was one of the technical guys at work, and he was saying, you know, well, if somebody took one of your windows away and you just had a big hole in your wall, you know, you wouldn't be happy about it, would you? But actually, a lot of houses, when you look at them, they have so many drafts and gaps around that if you added them all up, it would be the same as just taking a window away and living with a big hole in the wall. It has that level of impact on trying to create a comfortable temperature inside the home that's different to the outside. Imagine trying to do that if one of your windows was missing. So you need some level of ventilation, but you really need to control that ventilation. Now this could be manually, where you just sort of say open your windows an hour in the morning and then maybe open your windows an hour in the afternoon, just to have that change of air. Or like we've got in this house, you can have a sort of a mechanical ventilation system that changes that air continuously, and it's controlled. So you're not losing all of your heat to the outside, but you are getting that ongoing ventilation. And we need ventilation because when we breathe out carbon dioxide. And if you're in a very sealed space, let's say a new home that has been built in a very airtight manner, if you just keep breathing out, you're breathing in the oxygen, you're breathing out the CO2, you'll get a higher level of CO2 inside that home. And actually breathing in CO2, a high quantity of CO2, is actually not very good for you. And the other thing that can create a problem in homes is a lot of the products that we have, certainly new products, they sort of off gas. When you buy something new and it sort of smells new, what's actually happening there is it's off gassing. Those chemicals are going into the air and that's what you can smell. Unfortunately, those chemicals are not good for you at all. So if you've got a new home, say, and it's full of new things, whether that's new paint and new plasterboard, new furniture, new all those things, they're all off-gassing chemicals. So again, you need to have that air flushed through and that change of air. But on the other side of that, you don't want all the windows and doors open all the time, so essentially you might as well be living outside or living in a tent or whatever. There's lots of fresh air living in a tent, but maybe it's not as comfortable and it's not very warm and maybe not very dry. Oh, that's great, I've got a bit of sun now in my eye. Okay, I'm moving over here. Sorry, but I've got some sun now streaming into my face, which is not ideal. But anyway, we'll carry on. So we've talked about insulation, we've talked about ventilation. The third component to our trinity is heating, or I should also say heating or cooling, because what you're wanting to do is change the state inside your insulation different than what's outside. And there are several ways you can create heat in a home or cooling. The first, of course, is your body. I mean, your body is giving off heat all of the time. So any bodies in your home are actually warming your house. And if you have really good insulation, in some cases that might be enough. The other things that are always providing heat are things like your fridge and your freezer. And if you're using your stove, for instance, that's also creating heat. The next best way of creating the right temperature in your home would be using the free power of the sun. So when we did the renovation here, we put extra windows in the front of our home. So we're in the southern hemisphere, so our sunny side is north. But on our sunny side, we put more windows, and on our shady side, we took windows away. Because ideally you want smaller windows at the back because they're just losing heat, and you want bigger windows at the front so you can have that sun coming into your home. In the winter, the angle of the sun dips down, And that sun then can stream into your house and warm up your home. And that does most of the heavy lifting in our house, to be perfectly honest, is the sun streaming into our house, warming up our concrete floors, warming up that thermal mass, and that makes a very pleasant temperature that lasts well into the evening because of that insulation. In the summer, when the sun is at a higher angle, we have quite deep eaves on our house, and we also have a pergola with grapes growing on it. So in the summer we don't get the sun coming into our home, so it's shady outside of our home. Oh, that's very heavy rain. The chickens are scarpering into the chicken house now. Anyway, yeah, so in the summer the sun is at a much steeper angle and the sun doesn't come into our house. Therefore, the inside of our house then stays cooler because it's shady and yeah, the sun doesn't come into the house. So the sun is the best way. It's cheap. Obviously it's the best way because it's free. So the other way to heat your home is, of course, mechanical heaters. There's a whole different range of mechanical heaters, and I'm not going to go into that in detail about whether it's a log burner or what, all those sorts of things. That maybe will be the topic of another video. But the key thing to note is that it should be controlled heating. So you want a thermostat and you want a timer on a heater so that you can use as little heat as possible to maintain the right temperature, not get too hot, not get too cold. But as I say, if you have really good insulation, then you actually don't need that heater to be on very much for the house to be warm and for it to hold on to that heat. That's why I say insulation is so important. We have one wall-mounted panel heater and that warms our house beautifully. We do have a log burner, just really because there was an open fire when we bought the house. And so we filled it in with a very efficient log burner, but we only really use that a handful of times, very infrequently in the winter we put that on. And we find that if we put in the wood, we have to be really careful. We put one load of wood in and light. We can't put any more in because it gets so warm in here because of the insulation that we would literally have to open doors and windows because it would be too warm. So as you can see, we don't really need that much heat in the house to warm the house because of all of the insulation that we have. But if you have mechanical heating, or indeed if you're using the sun, you want some level of control about that heating to maintain a comfortable temperature. So those key things that we've talked about: insulation, ventilation and heating stroke cooling. Those are the three components to make a warm, comfortable home. But don't feel bad if your house is not perfect and doesn't have all those things, because honestly there are houses in New Zealand worth millions and millions of dollars that don't have those components, that essentially are not comfortable to live in. I've seen really expensive properties that are all glass. And there's no way an all glass house can be comfortable because it has no insulation. There'll be too much sun coming in, it'll boil or freeze. That is not a comfortable home. So many houses are built for aesthetic value and not for comfort. And I really don't see any reason why both of those things can't be achieved. Let's talk a little bit about how those things interconnect. You need all three of those components to have a really comfortable home. If you only have two of them, and God forbid any one of them, then you won't get a very comfortable home. If you have, say, insulation and you have heating, this is a lot of modern houses are like this, it makes quite a comfortable temperature inside, but it's very stuffy. You've got that bad air build-up. So all those VOCs, the excess CO2, all of those things are now stuck in the home and you don't have that fresh air. So you need the ventilation to add to those two to make it comfortable. If you have ventilation and you have heating, essentially you're just spending a huge amount of money to try and heat the home, where basically it's all just leaving out of the walls. You haven't got any insulation, there's nothing to hold on to that heat. Let's say you've got ventilation and you've got insulation but you haven't got any heating or cooling, then essentially you're holding on to the same temperature as outside. So you're not you're not getting anywhere. You might as well go and sit outside, because the inside is going to be the same as outside. So you need that heating or cooling inside so that it's different than the outside. So in short, those three components that you want in your home, that you want to all work together, are heating stroke cooling, insulation and ventilation. The heating and cooling is creating the right temperature, the right condition within your home. The insulation is holding on to that temperature that you've created inside your home, and the ventilation is changing that air inside your home to maintain healthy air quality. So I hope that's helped, and that maybe it's explained a few things that maybe you weren't sure of before. And to keep those things in mind, if you're looking to buy a new home, or you're looking at building a new home, or you're looking at doing some renovation in your home, just keep those three things in mind, because obviously what we all want is a really warm, comfortable, pleasant, healthy place to live. You know, it's all great having beautiful decor and paint, and it might look really flash, and it certainly will do when you go in on the open homes or the real estate agent shows you around. But have a look at those three factors in any home and see where it falls down and where it might be good, because that's what's going to stick around. That's what you're going to live with year in, year out. When you've moved in and some of the prettiness has faded, or the paint's chipped or whatever, the comfort of the home is going to stay with you. Anyway, I hope that's helped, and I'll see you next time. Bye!